The cookies we talked about in a previous video are a great way for a website driven by PHP to be able to maintain state, essentially to be able to save data that can be accessed from multiple requests. PHP makes working with cookies a fairly easy thing to do. It gives us the nice set cookie function that we can call in order to create new cookies. It gives us the cookies array, which we can then use to access the values of those cookies. It takes care of all the trouble of actually writing the cookies in the proper format and then parsing them again and making them available to us. So overall, cookies are nice, but they are still potentially just slightly more complicated than they might need to be in a lot of situations. Most of the time when we create cookies, for example, the only things that we're really concerned with are the name and the value. So having the set cookie function be set up to where we can also set path and domain and secure and expiration dates, so many of those different values we would use with set cookies just would not be used all that often. Usually it's just name and value to create a transient cookie. There are other issues that we also sometimes run into with cookies, one of them being that we are often limited in how many different cookies we can create. We also have to remember that only strings can be stored in cookies. So when we're working with PHP and we have arrays and we have objects and we have all these different types of objects, all these different types of things, we have to keep in mind that everything has to be translated into a string before it can actually be stored in a cookie. To kind of help us out with some of these cookie type situations, PHP actually has another technology built into it that we can use for convenience called sessions. What sessions essentially are, they give us another way to be able to maintain state, very much like the way that cookies do. When we use sessions in PHP, we can put values into what we would call the user's session. We would then be able to later retrieve the values from the user session on any other page on the website. So they allow us to easily be able to store information that can then be retrieved from any of our other pages in a project. So they have that same sort of advantage that cookies have. But one of the other nice things that sessions have is that they're much easier to work with. Essentially, sessions in PHP expose themselves purely as an associative array. That's all we have to do is just work with an associative array, putting values into the array, retrieving values from the array, like we've done a million times. And we can put anything we want to into this array. The array can store other arrays. It can store objects. It isn't restricted to purely storing strings. And one of these session arrays will be automatically maintained for every separate user. So if user A comes to our website, then a special session array will be set up just for user A. Anything we put into that array for user A will only be viewed, will only be accessible, will only actually be there for user A. If user B comes to our website, they would then have their very own copy of the session array. They could have their own individual values stored in that array that would be separate than the values that are stored in the array for user A. So really, all of the advantages of cookies, none of the disadvantages. Why use cookies at all then? Well, sometimes cookies, the extra complications that go along with them, like being able to set an expiration date, for example, is exactly what we might want. With sessions, these session arrays that I'm talking about, they are always transient, meaning that they always only exist as long as the browser window is open. So when a user comes to our website, if we set up sessions, we can store values there for that user. We can access those values on any of the pages that user may visit on our website. But as soon as that user closes their browser, or in a lot of browsers closes the tab that our website is open in, then at that point their session array goes away. It's done, and the next time they come back to the site, we'll have to start a new fresh array for them. So these sessions are always, by default, fairly short-lived. That's actually why they call them sessions, because they are tied to a single browser session. Let's take a look at how this actually works. What I've done here is I've put together a couple of pages for us to play with. This page is called page 1, and here on page 1 I have a hyperlink I can click that will take me over to another almost identical page called page 2. Page 2 then has the hyperlink that will take me back to page 1. If I pull up the actual code for these pages, here's the code for page 1. If I actually want to use sessions, the way I start is by, inside a block of PHP, calling a special function called session start. When I call session start, what that does is it basically gives PHP the instruction that tells it we want to be able to use sessions on this particular page. As long as we call that function, PHP will set everything up for us. Well, what exactly is it that PHP sets up for us? Well, essentially, the behind-the-scenes details of how sessions work is that when we call the session start function, PHP actually tells the browser to create a cookie. That cookie that it tells the browser to create, the client's browser, will have in it an ID number. That ID number should be unique. It'll be something that only that one particular user has stored in their one individual cookie. The PHP server will then remember that ID number and will automatically connect it to an array in memory. That array in memory is the sessions array I was telling you about before. To use it inside a block of PHP, what I can do is I can simply access an array called $_session. It is an associative array, so I can use it to do any of the things we normally do with an associative array. If I were to, for example, create an element in the session array, I'll call it number, and maybe I'll assign to that element of the array the number 9. If I were then to come back and echo the number is, and I'll append to that the value that I get from the session, which I have to spell right. I'll append to it the value that I get from the session array when I tell it to retrieve the element called number, and I'll put a break here at the end. The way that this will all actually play out then is when the user visits this page, session start will be called, which will say that we need to create a new cookie that stores a unique ID number for this particular user. At the same time, PHP will on the server create a session array and associate that session array internally with that ID number. So when I put 9 into this session array, this particular session array will be a session array that's just there specifically for this one user. When I then access the session array to pull the value back out, the value of course will be there just like it would be with any other array. What would be magic though, or what will be magic though, is that later when the user comes back again, when they visit this site again, their browser will automatically send back the cookie that we told it to make by calling session start. With that cookie's ID number in it, PHP will see that ID number and will automatically reconnect that user to the same session array that they had before. So if I create a session array here on this page, I'll then be able to access the session array for the same user on any other page. Let's go and see how that looks. If I jump over to the browser, I'm going to go ahead and start by pulling up my cookies, and let's see what's there. At the moment, you can see that there are no cookies at all, but here if I refresh page 1, I of course get the text that pops up that says the number is 9, so I did put a number into the session and I was able to retrieve that number again. And you can also see when that request was sent back, it came along with the instruction that told my browser to create a cookie. So here's the actual cookie that the server told my browser to create. It's called PHP sesh ID, SESSID, and this is my unique ID number that will be remembered for this particular browser, for me as a user, for this particular session. There's other details in there as well. You can, for example, see that there's no expiration date, so it is a session cookie, a transient cookie. It will be deleted next time I close my browser window. But for the time being, as long as this browser window stays open, that array on the server will always be associated with me through this particular ID number. So the value I put into the session, in this case the number 9, will be accessible to me anywhere I go. For example, if I jump over to page 2 here, over on page 2, if I wanted to be able to access that value from my session, here I'm just going to copy the same echo statement I did over on page 1. Page 2 now will be a separate request. Under normal circumstances, when the web is being its normal stateless self, this number would not be accessible to me because it had been created during a different request, basically on another page. But because of sessions, I'll now be able to access this value. The only trick, the only thing I need to remember to do is that any page where I want to use sessions, I have to always remember to call the session start function. One other little detail about that is that since the session start function is basically issuing an instruction to create a cookie, that is a header instruction, so you need to make sure you call your session start function before you send any other output out. You need to make sure you still have the opportunity to write to the headers before anything else is sent. But here on page 2, having called session start at the very beginning, that should now reconnect the user with the same session array, so I ought to be able to again retrieve a value that was put into the session previously. So page 1 puts a value into the session and is able to see it. Page 2 then will also be able to see the same number. I'm not using URL parameters or any other tricks to send the value from one page to another. That number will simply be maintained in that session array on the server, and that particular session array will become available to me based on the ID number in the cookie. So again, let's jump back over to the browser. If I refresh page 1 here, page 1, you can see the number 9. I still have my cookie. If I jump over to page 2 is also able to see the number 9 because that cookie and the ID value in it reconnected me to the same session array. So sessions can be a great complement to cookies. They certainly don't take the place of cookies in all situations. Anytime you need to be able to save state on a web page or throughout a website, and you need to have very specific control over the duration of time that that data will be available, when you need to have control over how secure it is, if you need to have control over what pages on the site are going to have access to it, a lot of times working directly with a cookie can still be a pretty good idea. But for situations where the most important thing to us is simply being able to save data so it's quickly and easily retrievable on another site or another page of the site, and the fact that that data is relatively short term, the fact that that doesn't matter too much to us, can often make sessions a very attractive option. Sessions are so easy to use, basically just calling the function session start and then just working with the session array as we would with any other associative array. It's just a really winning combination. Makes a lot of things that we would need to do much easier than if we had to go the full-blown cookie route.